this is Jeff Scott of Blackhawk Technical College. I made the decision that the last two chapters I'm going to go over from this book that we've been talking about since, well, for a while. That being Professional ASP.NET MVC5. The last two chapters I'm going to go over are chapters 3 and 4. And if you have a problem with that or don't understand why or whatever, just come talk to me and then I'll be more than happy to talk to you about it. I've got a feeling no one's really watching these tapes, so it's not worth me wasting my time. Okay, I mean, that's a terrible way to put it, but I'm just being honest here. So chapter 3, which starts on page 49, is on views. And as you can see, with the chapter objectives, we talk about the purpose of views, view basics, along with views 101, strongly typed views, view models, how to add a view using Razor, which is a kind of a different way to code, and how to specify a partial view. Notice they say there that you can visit here to get the notes at the end of each chapter. It says you can for offline use. I'm not sure exactly even what that is, but I know if I click on here I should get something though. So I'll see what that is. Alright. It says there developers spend a lot of time focusing on well-crafted controllers and model objects, and for good reason, because clean written code forms the basis of a maintainable web app. But when a user visits your web app, none of that work is visible. What is visible, again, is the view. As it says here on page 50, the view effectively is your, they call it the ambassador, but it's your view. It's the way the user perceives the site. Alright? And it says that even if you have a good looking view, if the rest of your site is buggy, it's not going to help. Or if you've got a really ugly view but the rest of the site is fine, that's not going to help you either. So in this chapter, as mentioned, they don't concentrate on how to make a view. Alright? Rather, they demonstrate how views work in ASP.NET Model View Controller and what the responsibilities of views are. Alright. In chapter 2, as it says, they demonstrated how controllers can return strings and then output to the browser. But what happened there was they said that other than really trivial apps, that's not the way you're going to do things. Because you had a controller, you didn't really do much with a view, you didn't really do much with a model. And that's not typically the way that it's going to work. The view, as mentioned here, is responsible for providing the user interface to the user. Views typically are not directly accessible in ASP.NET. Alright. MVC, you can't point your browser to a view and have it render. Rather, as it says there, a view is always rendered by a controller, which gives it the data that it should render. Alright. In some simple cases, the view needs little information from the controller, but more often than not, it needs something. So, view basics starting on the bottom here of page 50 and going onward. As it says, they're going to start off pretty slow. Let's start by taking a look at the simplest case, a view that doesn't need any information. So it says open your views home index CS HTML file, and we should see this. So let's take a look. And one more time, that was home index. Oops, sorry. Alright, so here it is. Hopefully. There we go. So they're showing it to you right here. It's also in your book on page 51. Home index index.cshtml. Should mention, meaning C# HTML file. If you use a VB, it's VB HTML. Okay. So there's the same stuff that they're showing here, alright, as what they're showing in the book. It says aside from a tiny bit of code that sets the title at the top of the page, the rest of it is standard HTML. The listing here on page 52 shows the controller that initiates the view. So it says if you browse to the root of the site, it yields no surprises. The index method of the home controller renders the home index view, which is just the preceding view's content. So right there. So in other words, if we come here and we run our application. Again, I'm going to go over chapter 3 today, chapter 4 tomorrow, and probably put this book to rest, so to speak. It's a good book. It's very heady, though. I've been reading chapters 4 and 5, and it gets even headier as you go on. Alright, so here is our home page. If I click home, I'm going to stay right where I am. But you see it right here. So that is the page right there. That page is what you see from what's being rendered from right here. So you'll notice we've got a jumbotron. It says home page for the title. And it says ASP.NET is a free web framework for building great websites, etc., etc. And as we go back there, it's a free website for building great websites. Home page, there's our tag. There's the getting started, and there's a bunch of other stuff that's in there. Okay? It says, okay, that example was pretty basic. In the simplest case, you make a request to the controller, which returns a view that's really just some static HTML. Easy to get started, but no dynamic. In other words, that's typically, you are going to want something dynamic in there. Alright, so it says the easiest way to do that is to use a viewbag.viewbag. Alright, is to use a viewbag rather. Viewbag has its limitations, but it can be useful when just passing a little data to the view. Take a look at the About action here. Alright, and it says your application description page. It says this is nearly identical to the index page you looked at earlier, but notice that the view controller does this a little bit differently. Right here, what you see in what I'm about to put in blue here, that's Razor. Alright, you see that here it starts with an @ sign, and everything that you want to do here is between curly braces. So what we're doing here is we're setting that title to About. Alright, then we're telling the system in the H2 tag, we're telling it to render that title, and we're telling it to render the associated message. Alright, so again, if I go back, alright, we've got the I like cake and the About stuff, but if we go back, we could go back and make changes to it, but that's the change that we were told to make in an earlier chapter. Alright, I just changed the About. Your application description page got changed to I like cake. Alright, again, not what I would have put there, but what the author asked to be put there. Alright, understanding view conventions, page 54. It says in the previous section you looked at some examples. The controller actions you looked at so far in this chapter have just called return view to render the view. They haven't had to specify the view's file name. Alright, it's because it says, as they mentioned, you take advantage of some conventions that are built into the MVC framework. When you create a new project template, you'll notice that a project contains a views directory that looks somewhat like this. And under the home, you see the About, the content, and the index. Well, in the home, you see the About, the content, and the index. Alright, same stuff we looked at here. Each controller folder contains a view for each action method, and the file is named the same as the action method. That's why it's easier to go through and do this. So it says the view selection logic looks for a view with the same name as the action within the view's controller name. The view selected here would have been views home index index.cs HTML. So let's try this. Let's go over to here. Copy. I don't know if it's going to let me copy this over to across here. Actually, I won't that, but that's fine. I'll rerun it. Now it's said here that what we were supposed to add was views home index.cs HTML. So I have got that. So we're already here. So what we're actually running is this file. Alright, not sure why I've got the error there, but that's what is running. Home index, and the index file that runs is the associated HTML file. Alright, so when you run that, you click there, that's what comes up and runs, but what's actually running, what the author is saying here, is this. Alright, as with most things in ASP.NET MVC, you can override the convention. It says if you wanted, you could have it return not index instead of the index, so you can put anything you want in. One of the things that becomes important with this, and this is a little bit hard to understand, I read through it quite a few times myself, and that is this idea of strongly typed views. The big thing that you get with a strongly typed view, just so you understand this, is what you get is IntelliSense. So as you work your way through and you start doing things, the IntelliSense kicks in. So the author says here, suppose you need to write a view that displays a list of album instances. One possible approach is to add the albums to the view bag and iterate over them like they show here. It says in your view you can iterate and display over products like this. It says, but notice that you need to cast the view bag .albums to an IEnumerable album before working with it, right there. It says you also have to, you could have also used the dynamic keyword, which would have made it easier, but then you wouldn't have had the IntelliSense. So they mention here it would be nice to have a clean syntax afforded by the dynamic example and not lose the effect of strong typing. So you want the IntelliSense. So the author says in the controller method you can specify a model via an overload of the view method. So what they're saying here is this. This is where it's changing. Return view albums. The next step, as it says, is to indicate to the view what type of model using an add model declaration. So you put that up on the top here. And in order to be able to do that, then up at the top of the program, you have to put an at using statement. And that is not really very different from some of the stuff that we've seen. Let's see. Let's go to the... Alright. Stuff that you see right here. It's along the same lines. Is it the same thing? Of course it's not the same thing, but it's similar. Notice it's at using. Alright. So to avoid needing a specially qualified fully qualified name for the model, you can make use of the using declaration. It says an even better way to do that is to go and put that information into your web.config file. Alright, so if we go and we look at, and yeah, remember our old friend, the old web.config file, there is one here. Alright. And I'm not sure exactly where we would go ahead that. I would have to go take a look. But the author mentions that basically that's what you do. Alright, notice it's system.web.webpages.razor. So those are the particular pages for which you may be using Razor. Alright. So the author says here on page 57, we started by talking about using the view bag to pass information, and then we pushed to a strongly typed model. In reality, both these are passed via the view data dictionary, which they're now going to look at in detail. Alright, it says you can read values, set and read values to the view data dictionary using the standard syntax like this, or as it says, you could have the simpler syntax, which is like this. You know what? This looks very similar to stuff we've done in C and in other languages, where rather than having to worry about the arrays, you can use a more structured like the name dot, right, the element. Now notice on page 58 here, the author says it may not seem like that big of a thing to you, but it's important that you realize there are differences between the two syntaxes. One obvious difference, it says, is viewbag only works when the key you're accessing is a valid C# identifier. Another issue is that you can't pass dynamic values as parameters to extension methods. Now, if you say, well, that doesn't make any sense, you're going to have to read the chapter. Okay. So they talk about view models here, and they say one thing you can do is just literally take all of your data and stick it into the view bag and do everything that's in there. Okay. It says you'll generally want to stick strongly typed model objects so you've got the IntelliSense. But that's not always what you're going to be doing, and that's not always what you'd want to be doing. So the author mentions halfway down here on page 59, right here, says one recommended approach is to write a custom view model class. What that does, as mentioned down below, is it gives you the benefits of a strongly typed view without requiring any changes to your model class. Again, as you see when we get into this, it gets more and more complex. So let's look at adding a view, which is what they do next, starting on page 60. All right. So it says, how does a view get created in the first place? The easiest way to display the Add View dialog box is to just right-click on an action method. All right. You can use any one you want, but they just say, for this example, you can just add a new action method named Edit, and then create a view for it. Begin by adding an edit action method to the home controller in the MVC5 app. Alright, so let's go. There's our home controller. So we're going to come down here, down towards the bottom, and as we're asked to do here, public action result edit return view. Okay. All right. Next, launch an Add View dialog by right-clicking an action method and selecting Add View. This brings up the Add View dialog box that you see takes up the first half of page 61. It says the following list describes each view item, menu item in detail. The first thing, the view name. As it says, it's pre-populated with the name of the action method, and it's required. Next is the template. It says after you select the type, you can also choose a scaffold template, which we'll talk about more in the next chapter tomorrow. These templates are used by Visual Studio in their templating system to generate the view. And as you can see here, here's your possibles. And this is the second part that you see on page 61 in the book. Now, going back for just a second, alright, so that's what we saw. And here's a description of the different view scaffold types. I'm not going to read any of them to you. You can see them on the screen right here, and they're also on page 62 of the handout that I gave you. Another thing that's in there are the reference script libraries. Well, that's jQuery and JavaScript and all the other JavaScript libraries that you're going to need to work with. All right. Create a partial view, as it says. If you select that option, it indicates that the view is not a full view, so the layout that's in there is disabled. And finally, use a layout page. It says this option determines whether or not the view you are creating is a fully self-contained view. Okay. Again, it says customizing scaffolding views. That's all the way up into chapter 16, but it's discussed starting in the next chapter. All right. Most of the rest of the chapter, which starts on page 63, talks about the View Razor engine. As it says, ASP.NET MVC includes two different view engines, Razor, which is the new one, and the older Web Forms view engine. This section covers the Razor. So it's mentioned down towards the bottom under the What is Razor section. It was introduced in MVC3. It's the default engine from now on. It's the response to one of the most requested suggestions received by the ASP.NET MVC team to provide a clean, lightweight, simple view engine that doesn't contain any syntactic cruft contained in the existing Web Forms view engine. It gives you a fairly simple syntax that you can use. And it basically allows the developer to do virtually anything that they want to do. So they show an example right here. It says Razor accomplishes this by understanding the structure of markup so that it can transition between code and markup as soon as possible and as smoothly as possible. To understand this, some examples will help. This example demonstrates a simple Razor view that contains some view logic. So it's going to iterate its way through this list of items and print out the name of each item. Notice here the don't overthink it. Razor was designed to be easy and intuitive, but it's like anything else. It's easy and intuitive once you've worked with it for a while. You haven't, neither have I. Alright. The key thing here, as mentioned on the bottom of page 64 and going on, is that @ sign that's used to kind of transition. And where they got that from, basically, just so you know, is you use that same @ sign if you want to go and take and put ASP.NET code inside of a non.cs or a non.vb file. So if you want to go and actually put in code inside of, for example, where am I here? Alright, we had this up before our index.cs HTML file. We should be able to come in here though and do this and put in some code here, whatever that code happens to be. Now I may get an error message here, I don't know. But what I'm telling you is that's the kind of stuff that we looked at earlier. Alright? So it doesn't like what I put here, okay? But that is a way of doing this, is to go and put code in here. And you saw this last semester, or earlier in the semester, I should say, when we talked about doing this kind of stuff in ASP.NET. Just a couple more things, because I'm just about finished here. Page 66, the author mentions anytime there's, where are we? Anytime there's ambiguity in Razor, you can use parentheses to make sure you get what you want. Alright. And they also talk a little bit in here, starting on the bottom of page 66, about HTML encoding. Well, again, the idea is that we want to make sure that if somebody goes in and tries to put HTML tags in there, that those tags are basically siphoned off so that they look like this. We don't actually want you to be able to, when you put the tags in like that, to show that mold. Instead, we want to use HTML encoding, because if you don't, the next step is that you're going to be able to put in JavaScript tags. And the same kind of thing will happen, that if you put in JavaScript tags, you'll be able to actually run JavaScript inside of here, which you don't want to allow to happen. Okay? Alright, code blocks on page 68. Razor supports code blocks within a view. We've already looked at that just a little bit. Blocks of code require curly braces to delimit the block, in addition to an @ sign, right, that you see right here. Then they give you some examples. Code expressions, it says, are evaluated and written to the response. This is typically how you display a value in a view. Right? The view name dot the value name. Notice again, code expressions in Razor are automatically HTML encoded. And they give you a few more examples here on pages 69 and 70. Explicit, so you can actually do some math in there. You can use unencoded if you want to, by using the html.raw, which is going to basically say you don't want your stuff to be HTML encoded. Right. So blocks of code are simply sections of code that are executed. They're useful for declaring variables that you might need to use later. Mixing code and plain text, it says Razor looks for the beginning of a tag to determine when to transition from code to markup. Sometimes you want to output plain text immediately after a code block, and they show you an example of how you can do that here down towards the bottom of page 69 in the text. Couple more things here. Page 70, escaping the coding delimiter. All right, with two @ signs. It says you can display the @ sign by using two @ signs. So if you do want to actually, it's very much like using escape characters. Comments, notice, start with a @ sign star and then with the star @ sign. Okay. And then finally, the last thing I believe that's discussed in this chapter, one of the last things, are layouts. As mentioned here on the bottom of page 70, layouts in Razor help to maintain a consistent look and feel among the app. So they show a very simple layout here down on the bottom of page 70. It says it looks like standard Razor view, but you'll notice the call to @render body that's inside of here. This is a placeholder that marks a location where views using this layout will have their own main content rendered. Multiple Razor views can now take advantage of this layout for a consistent look and feel. And that's what they show here on page 71. View start on the bottom of page 72. It says here in the very bottom of the page and going on to the next page, in the preceding example, each view specified its layout page using the layout property. For a group, this can get redundant and hard to maintain. You can use the _viewstart.cs HTML page to remove the redundancy. And they're showing you this on page 73 right here. In addition to returning a view, an action method can return a partial view in the form of a partial view result. And that's shown here on pages 73 and 74. So that's pretty much it for the chapter, and we've gone through everything that's here. So, as mentioned, view engines have their purpose. They exist to take data passed in from the controller and generate formatted output, which is normally in the form of HTML. All right, tomorrow when I come in, I'm going to go over the models chapter and then the